Welcome to United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America on WSGW. Now, here is your host, Kareem Bowen.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another session of United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. I'm excited to be here with you all once again. We have an amazing show with you. I have a great young lady that's in the studio with us. She's not actually in the studio, she's in the stream, but she's going to be a part of this conversation. And I want to introduce her right now because I want, if she's interested in getting involved with some of this early feedback when I'm getting on my stool and I begin to get on my soapbox, I want to bring her in so she feels comfortable to be a part of this conversation. We are growing to become good friends and working together and doing some things around the community. So I'm glad to have with me none other. I always call her Carly Rose, which is her social media handle. But Carly Hammond, she is a community organizer here in Saginaw County. Carly, why don't you give a shout out to our United Shades of Gray audience?
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. And thanks for having me on United Shades of Gray. It's a really great show. Well,
thank you. I'm so glad you're here. You've been with me on Straight Talk on KISS 107. So it's good to have you in here to give your perspectives. A very different audience, but it's going to be a great conversation that we have going on today. I have with me, sitting in with me at the producer spot is none other than Rick Antonio. Once again.
Close enough. There we go. You know, I'm sorry this thing took so long to get running, but hey, we here.
Hey, Rick, you are a man who wears many hats. I certainly understand it. I'm so excited that you're here with us on the other side of the glass screen with me today. But hey, let's get into it. Things happen. Let's make great things happen on today. I'm excited to get into this conversation. We're going to just jump right in. I want to say for everyone that's out there, welcome. Summer is well on its way. I think that this warmer weather, it suits me so well, Rick. I just wake up in the morning and the sun is already shining. I love it. I hate when we have those days where you wake up at 6 a.m. and it's dark, and then you get home and it's 6 p.m. and it's dark. But allowing the sun to kiss your face first thing in the morning as you get your day going is amazing feeling. How are you feeling? Are you feeling any different with the brighter sun?
Oh, I love the brighter sun. It's the heat that gets me. We're supposed to be warming up this weekend.
That's beautiful weather.
It is, but
93, 94 degrees.
Without the central air, it's just...
Well, I love it.
Another reason to come into work.
If we could, I guess so, you could scam off the heat, right? The air. But if you're like me, I love the warmer weather. I'm not necessarily a Floridian because it's too humid. And people say, you got to get to Arizona. I have family members in Arizona. I get to Arizona. It's just too darn hot in Arizona. You're talking 115 degrees. That is just too much. But a good 95-degree day with lots of sun, a few clouds overcast is something that I can really get used to. Carly, where are you at with this? Are you like all of this heat as well?
Yes and no. It's a little bit too much to go outside and do yard work or do gardening. But it's nice if you're in the shade. I like to, but it does mean you can do work at 8 o'clock because it's still bright outside, and then the sun's cooling down. You just got to watch out for mosquitoes. So it's all a balancing act.
I haven't seen any skeeters yet.
I haven't either.
So I'm kind of glad about that. Don't speak them up, Carly. Let them stay. Let sleeping dogs lie.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, knock on wood. But
I did see my first fireflies last night.
Really?
Those were beautiful.
I usually see tons of those in the area. We do have a lot of fireflies. They're absolutely gorgeous when you get.
It's been dry this year.
Yeah, it's very, very, very much so. So I haven't seen a lot of stuff out there, but I want to get to rating what's hot off the press. And this stuff is, you can't make this up. Over the past few weeks, we've been having these conversations, Rico, with people that have been coming in, CEOs, presidents, whatever. And we've been talking about dismantling racism in the systems in which they operate. And it's going to be interesting because I want to talk about, I got a message from one of the individuals who listened to this on LinkedIn. And they said, look, I've listened to your conversations. Why are you always talking about race? And they were saying that they didn't believe this systemic racism existed. So here's for those of you who don't believe the systemic racism exists. The NFL has agreed, and this is like breaking news. They've agreed they're going to end a long-running practice, which is called race norming. Now, this was something that started in the 1990s when they were coming out with the information about the concussions and the CTE settlement that's taking place. They have a $1 billion settlement. So those individuals who are out there and they're former NFL athletes, and they're having issues, with memory fog and different things that are relating to those concussions.
Yeah.
They now can actually put in an application, say, listen, these are my injuries, and receive a portion of the settlement, $1 billion settlement based upon the concussions and the fact that the NFL did not take that piece into understanding. And now people are dealing with brain damage, really, and not understanding that it's related to their time in the NFL. Well, someone may say, well, so what's the big deal? Well, race norming is something that the NFL would do. And basically what it in essence, what it says was that Black players start off with a lower cognitive function as being men before coming into the NFL. Now, this is so interesting because as I was sharing on one of the other shows, I was saying that, when we look at the fact that how systemic racism began, it began with the understanding that at the time that Blacks were brought into the mix of things and given rights to vote and considered citizens and all of those things, they were only considered 3/5 human before that time. And so that would mean that they had a lower cognitive function than other people that existed. So we see even in a system such as the NFL, and this is something that was instituted in the 1990s, we see those things that have permeated our system because of racial bias that are yet in existence. And so they're now finally in 2021 going to do away with that particular piece because of its inherent racial bias against people of color that are in the NFL. So these are the types of things that I've been talking about, and people say they don't exist, but they do exist, and we understand that they exist, and it is nothing to fear. I think you were here one time, and I was talking with someone, and I'm not going to say who, but we had the conversation about systemic racism.
Yeah.
And I hear it all the time. A lot of people don't believe that this exists. I don't believe in systemic racism. And I said, I need you to understand that when we talk about systemic racism, we're not saying that all white people are racist.
Right.
And I think, and the response was, that's what we hear. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
That was the response, Carly. The response was, well, that's how I hear it. So I want to say to those of you who are hearing these conversations, let's take these conversations in with an open heart, with our ears open, understanding that this is not about pointing the finger at anyone. You did me wrong because,
or taking it personally.
Absolutely. We know that most people today, no one has ever had a slave. Okay. We understand that is something that was outlawed and banned a long time ago. And so you cannot take this personally, but it's something that we have to begin to investigate, to take a look at, to see how we can begin to bring change into the dynamics of how things operate.
Yeah. Some of the rules like this one that were implemented long ago that may still be stemming from something like that.
And it's about once we begin to have a conversation and we look at them from a very investigative, open, different perspective, we can begin to address some of those issues. Carly, feel free to jump in if you want to say something here as it relates to what we're talking about.
Well, all I can say is that if you get offended about when anybody brings up systemic racism, please just dig into that a little bit with yourself and figure out where that's coming from, why you're feeling offended. I am a history major right now. I'm still like doing school, so learning history is a radicalizing act. And what I would encourage anybody to look into is specifically the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And back before, when it was the Congo Free State, when we had the Rape of Africa and the Belgian Conference and all of the ways that was cut up, because it's a really great, it's not a look at like where things started, but I really love learning history because they say the quiet parts out loud. All of the eugenics and all of the dysgenics and all of the phrenology and all of the scientific experimentation on Blacks in the Congo specifically and how they were used and played against each other, you start to see some patterns. And a lot of those patterns are still around today. A lot of white land ownership, a lot of taking of Black land, a lot of saying this is what's good for you. We know what's good for you. So we're just going to establish a reserve or a park that are still around today where people aren't allowed to live or hunt for sustainably. And it's everything from paternalism to moralisms to all of the isms and all of the isings. And it's really interesting way to draw patterns into what we see today still. So there's a lot of things I just don't buy. I don't buy the current economic development narrative because it's built on when we were doing colonialism in Africa. That's where those terms first came from, and that's still how we're thinking about it.
Well, you said something that was there's something that jumped out when you said it. It's how dominant culture often tells minority cultures, I know what's best for you. This is what you need. And one of the things that I think we are looking at this year, and really those of us who communicate and share conversations on racial bias, on equity, inclusion, is that this is really a time. And George Bush said it best. For hundreds of years, white America has spoken. They have said this is what's best for America. This is what's best for communities of color. And now this year in this season, this is the time for us to be silent and to listen. And, it's interesting. And I'm seeing this type of thing take place in some of the community leaders that I'm working with, where they're taking a step back and saying, we've led this for so long. We've looked at statistics. We've driven all of these different polls and we've come up with these plans that we say are good for you. But we're going to listen and say, what is it that you need in your community, and how can you be more effective in what you need to do, and how can we assist in that? And so I'm so encouraged by that changing in dynamics. It's something that I've seen for the first time this year that I've never seen before. And it really is something that's really cool. And that's what we have been talking about as we've been talking about, overcoming these systems of racism and dealing with race issues of bias and dealing with these things that have been in place for a long time. How can we begin to dismantle it? We all understand what the problem is. I think even those who don't want to accept that these things exist, we all see what the issue is. So if race is the issue, if bias is the issue, then how do we begin to engage it? And how do we begin to remove it from the systems and the structures that exist? So we're going to continue in that conversation. But I want to give I think this is a perfect time for me to give a shout out to those amazing conversations that we have been having with the leaders. And I want to give just a few of them that have been here. And I haven't had a representative yet from Dow Global come in and have a conversation. But Dow Global, Hemlock Semiconductor with Mark Bassett, TriStar Trust Bank with Gene Pickelman, out at Karen Carter and Don Garrettner with Dow Global. These companies have made some amazing steps to bringing some great change to communities of color. And this is a situation I always say, there's one thing you can talk change, but sometimes you got to put your money where your mouth is. And we'll have more conversations, and I'll be sharing more what these three particular companies are doing: TriStar Trust Bank, Hemlock Semiconductor, and Dow Chemical Global. They are really taking the bull by the horns, if you would. They are really putting their money to use, and they are going in to really make some real lasting change by investing in communities of color. And I'm so excited. And this all began with conversations. And so those of you who are listening out there, as Carly said, if you feel yourself getting a little tense and your throat get a little dry when we're having these conversations, or even your feelings beginning to be pricked, I think that's a place where you've got to really lean into those emotions and begin to ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? And if I'm feeling this way, does this mean that there is something here that needs to be dealt with? And just be willing to open up and have a conversation. One thing about United Shades of Gray, this particular platform, is that this is not about outing an individual. This is not about making someone feel bad, but this is really about providing information, providing a historical perspective, which is what Miss Carly Hammond was doing with her explanation of history, and then saying, okay, if this, we understand these are things that went on, what can we do to remedy these situations? And so I'm glad. All right, next thing before we get to it, because we're going to talk about that a little bit more, Carly, so hold on tight. I do want to talk about this, though. The Olympics, I'm tripping out that the Olympics are getting ready to happen. So they're going full steam ahead. Everyone is preparing for the Olympics to take place. And I love the Olympics. I'm all about the Olympics. I love what it represents. Carly, are you an Olympic person? Are you a person that tunes in? Because see, I have certain things that I look for the Olympics.
I will not tune in to the Olympics. I'll catch up later. I'll watch some of I love watching gymnastics.
Yeah.
That's always amazing. I think those athletes are I adore athletes. They are amazing at what they do. Like, and if you're at the Olympics, I'm one of those people who thinks you should put in like a normal person in every single heat next to the Olympians to show like just how good they are. Because when everybody finishes within a tenth of a second or a tenth of a point,
It's hard
to
see.
forget that these people have trained their entire lives to. So I like to see a normal person to like set the bar before all of those competitions.
Yeah.
And in this lane, all the way from Main Street, that would be crazy. but what is it that you lean? Because I know for me, you said gymnastics. The craziest thing, I found out about curling watching the Olympics one day, and it is something that just kind of captivates me, and I like to watch it. It's the strangest thing. I see basketball. I usually tune into the last round because there's so many of them. But gymnastics, I love to watch archery. What are some of the other? I love to watch the boxing matches. But I love the track and field. That is the highlight of my Olympic experience. What about you, Rick?
A lot of those. The curling always catches my attention because it's always on so late at night. But at the same time, this year in particular, I'm going to try to tune in to some of the baseball. I don't know if it's something new that they added just for the Tokyo Olympics or not, but the baseball, I want to see how that goes.
My God. I know baseball is America's sport, and you all that are listening, y'all, please forgive me. I played baseball. I love playing baseball. It's fun. I cannot watch baseball. I've gone to Tiger Stadium,
and I can understand that
with so many, great seats, great day, great weather. And after you sit there, you have a drink and you're eating a hot dog, and after that, it's kind of like, okay, now we're just baking in the sun. What's the purpose of this now? I could have watched this at home on TV and had more fun. So I'm not a big baseball person, but I know that America loves baseball, and Japan
loves baseball.
So it's kind of interesting.
And I like not just the baseball aspect of it, at least this year, but how they're incorporating new sports.
Yeah, no,
if that's what the case is.
I love new sports. I just want to make sure that they're a sport, that we're actually, because I know that you guys love golf, but golf is a personal exercise. I don't know if I'm yet working on the sport thing, and I know a lot of athletes will probably, it's definitely a sport. LeBron and those guys have said it wasn't a sport. Then they get out there and they're challenged to the max. I'm not sure. I still don't consider golf a sport. I consider it a leisurely pastime that we do to have fun. But anyways, that's what that is. But let me get to this message, and I think this is going to be a great segue into our conversation on today. So I received a message on LinkedIn for those of you who are out there. And in this conversation, and I want to make sure I'm reading this right, they said, why are you always harping on race? Systemic racism, it doesn't exist. We are not a racist nation. And if it does exist, why don't you do something about it instead of complaining about the past? Duly noted. I think that is a great, if that's how you feel, I think it's a great statement. But before we get into this, I want to know, what are your thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, Carly and Rick, what are your thoughts about that particular statement? That's what someone said to me.
This guy wants one guy to fix the whole country?
Yeah, I am it. I'm it. Tag, I'm it. But when I thought about this, Carly, what are you thinking? I see your eyes moving.
Yeah, I understand the sentiment. I grew up spent most of my time growing up in Frankenmuth, so I definitely understand the sentiment. And also, if you're just listening, you can't really tell. I'm very white.
I had noticed that, Carly.
Yeah, no, you kind of can't really tell. But I understand where the sentiment is coming from. It's wrong. It's just incorrect. People talk about race a lot because race is in everything. It is in everything. And you can learn about that by digging into history. You can learn about that by digging into politics, really almost any topic, because it is in everything. Because when we talk about race, I'll do a heavy cross cut here. When we talk about the history of race, it coordinates a lot with like the history of developments of nations and developments of capitalism as well, and capital, and how we structure economics, how we structure cultures, how we structure our social systems. Race is all a part of that. It is baked into every fiber of our social structure, and you can't pull away from it with it. Like you cannot disassociate yourself from that. If you the only people who can disassociate from it or believe that they're dissociating from it are white people, because they do not have to like they can choose to not experience the underbelly of racism in our society. That doesn't mean that they're not affected by it, because they are, and I would argue in negative ways as well. But I don't think that it's just an incorrect statement. It's an incorrect sentiment. I understand where it's coming from, and I would, I'm cool with talking with people about that, because I enjoy hearing them sort of get into their cultural mindset specifically, and where they think about that, because usually they're coming from a place where I see everybody equally. All I see is equality. And I just don't think that complaining about things, let's do something about things if there's really a problem. Yeah, that's okay. Okay, sure. But we also have to acknowledge what's going on, recognize where it comes from, and work on it, and recognize that this is also a system that's been built over thousands of years. And undoing those systems is going to take a very long time, a lot of work, a lot of conscious effort. And it can't be started by people saying like, oh, well, this is a problem that we solved in the 1960s.
And I think a key piece about this is even more so. I think that what's more problematic is that it's not just the system that we have to look at, but we have to understand that the systems were created by an ideology, and you can't put a face, a name, a color, anything like that when it comes to how we think. And dismantling how we think sometimes is the most damaging thing. I look at people who have been in an abusive relationship, and I'm sure, Carly, you've seen this a million times. They've experienced abuse in a relationship, and eventually in that relationship, after being abused for so long, that when they get set free or they're out of that relationship, they often forget how to live their lives abuse free. And they don't understand that, there are some things that are not okay. There are some things that have to change. And it's really about reprogramming how an individual thinks, how they are wired. And it goes down to the core of who we are as people. So when we talk about all of this stuff, when we're talking about systemic racism, and so, dear sir, if you should take the liberty and take the risk of listening to this conversation, I want to say this to you. What I want to say is this. I don't wake up every morning, and this conversation was asked to me by on Art Lewis's show one time. Is all you do is wake up and think about race? Absolutely not. I get up in the morning and I plan my day. I give thanks to my Heavenly Father for seeing another beautiful day. I make my plans. I get up. I usually call my mom or someone first thing in the morning just to say, hey, good morning. And I go about my day. And then I have conversations with race as those issues become. As I live, I recognize that the world sees me as a Black man. And in some communities, and it's not with everyone, because I don't think that our world is just everyone is racist, but I think that in some areas things happen, and it happens because I am a Black man. And so when the world sees my Blackness, I have to be able to address that from the fact that I am a Black man. So we have conversations because I think that a conversation is much more meaningful, and it brings out a more desired outcome than us sitting there having yelling matches and polarizing ourselves. One thing that I see in our community is that, segregation exists now because we desire to be segregated. And I think that we lose something beautiful in many ways. We lose something beautiful when we begin to segregate ourselves into places. However, I do understand the need for a community to segregate, because when we talk about, we're going to talk about Black Wall Street a little bit. I don't know if you saw the documentary on CNN that they played. It was an amazing show. We'll talk a little bit about that on the other side of this commercial break. But I understand the reason and the need to coalesce around those who are like us so that we can build effective things to make great things happen. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back with more Carly Hammond after this break.
United Shades of Grey will continue on WSGW.
All right, so social media. Hey, those of you who are listening via social media, I want to say thank you for tuning in today. Make sure that you get involved with this conversation When we come back, we're currently taking a break from our recording on the air. This show will play, and Rick, you're going to have to make sure that I get this right, on Sunday at 7 p.m. Give us the time.
Yeah, that would be looking at this again because my brain's kind of fried from the early morning stuff. 7.
7 p.m., 790 a.m. and 100.5 FM simultaneously.
Yes.
All right. And so I want you guys to tag into this conversation. But what I want you to do while you're here, feel free. You see the numbers that are coming across, strolling across. If you have a question or a comment by what you hear us talking about, feel free to get a part of this. Your comment will be live stream as well, and it also will air on our show. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about something that I hope, and I should have put it on what's hot off the press. When we talk about Black Wall Street, and they did a phenomenal job. We've talked about it here. I've shared with you all what Black Wall Street was. I've talked to you all about the Tulsa massacre that took place in Oklahoma. And so let's talk a little bit about that because it's going to air again this Saturday. And if you see this, I want to make sure that you guys get an opportunity. If you missed it, I want to make sure you guys get an opportunity to see it. So whenever you're ready, Rick, we're going to. Sunday
at 7.
Sunday at 7. Right.
Sunday at 7. I want to make that very clear.
I was like, what is going on? He's giving me that look.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know about that one.
All right. So stay tuned. We're going to go live once more with you guys.
Okay. One moment.
You're listening to United Shades of Gray on WSGW.
We're back from that commercial break. We're here with Carly Hammond. She is a community organizer, and I'm going to get to the heart of what we're going to be talking about with Miss Carly on today. She is here for a very important conversation. But before we did that, when I was going on the break, I told you guys that I wanted to bring up the fact that CNN produced something. We have been sharing, and I shared, I think, an entire session with you all. If you go back and take a look on Black Wall Street and the Tulsa massacre that took place in the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, 50 square blocks of a community completely devastated, completely owned by Black residents, buildings, commercial buildings. You could do anything that you wanted to in this particular community, from factories to banks, department stores. All of those things existed, and because of racial hate, something took place between two teens in an elevator. The young boy fell. The girl took off running. She told her parents later that she thought that he was trying to sexually assault her. The parents were upset. They were outraged. Nothing ever really happened. But as we began to see what's going on in the story of that, the entire community was wiped out, burned down the buildings, killed, over 300 plus or hundreds of individuals, threw them in mass graves, erased this from history, and thought that they would never come to light. Well, now residents and survivors of the Tulsa massacre, one lady who's 107 years old, they are now speaking out and they're demanding justice. If you get an opportunity, it aired originally this past Sunday, but this coming Saturday, they're going to have another replay of that, and it's called, I think it's called Dreamland, the story of Black Wall Street, the burning of Black Wall Street. I want you guys to tune in, but Carly, I want to change because when I first met you, you were out there protesting in the streets, and you were running for state representative of the 95th district. And I'll be very honest, because we've talked about this, and I'm the person, I give it to you straight, and we'll be very honest with you with what I say. I'm going to own it, and we'll move on from there. And they were like, oh, you got to hear Carly Hammond. She's powerful. She's passionate. She's really about this. And I'm like going, what is a little white girl from Frankenmuth going to do to really address the issues that we are having as Black people in Saginaw? And I said that, and then after the election, I said to someone, if she's serious and she stays in the fight and she really means that she wants to bring change to Saginaw County as a whole, then I will support her in whatever endeavor she has done. And that has not waned. And I want to tell you guys that when you find people who are going to continue to fight when the cameras are turned off of them, that's when you know that the fight is real. And so I see that fight in you, Carly. I appreciate you for being here today. I told you that story. I owned up to it. I have since said, hey, I didn't apologize because I meant what I said, but I told her, you have my full support. And so she's here today fighting for our community once again. Carly Hammond, once again, welcome to United Shades of Gray.
Thank you so much for having me. And I understand the sentiment. I don't, and I don't necessarily like, again, I sort of like what you said, like to own up to it. I don't even disagree with it in general. Like I don't disagree with the questioning of, what is this little white girl from who admits she spent most of her youth in Frankenmuth gonna do? Like that just doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense. I don't make sense to most people. But a lot of like my background and where I grew up, like that's part of the reason why I do this. And the things that I saw, and the things that I personally experienced that were not okay, that were injustices in my life. And looking around, I got my start in politics in Flint. That was like a forged in fire sort of a situation where things were going on that were so wrong and so bad. And people ask me, why are you here? You're not from Flint. Why do you care? And I never understood that quite. Like, I just care. Like, I don't know. You guys are suffering and there are people who are doing this to you, and I want to help. I want to fight. And teach me how to do it. Teach me how I can use my skills to help. And since then, it's I've grown a lot. I've evolved a lot, changed my thinking with certain things. But one of the things that hasn't changed is just I get really, really upset. I get very upset when I see, I don't want to just say like all injustice, but really when I see suffering that is avoidable, or somebody that I think is like moving to do or to cause suffering intentionally or unintentionally that is avoidable, I can't stand it. I don't take that. I do not like those people. I have a very hard time keeping my temper down enough if I feel like I'm in a room where people are planning on doing something that's going to hurt people.
And so I want to say this. She is one of the greatest examples, I think, of how the social protests and the cries for social justice have brought communities together. And Carly, a young white girl from Frankenmuth, has connected with a very dynamic group of young African Americans, really in the city of Saginaw, and she has really kind of brought awareness and really I would say a spark to stay on top of things that are happening in our community. It started with that cry for social justice that brought us together, and this is a perfect example for those of us, even though we don't agree about everything. There are ways that we can come together to make something great happen in our community. So this is where we are. So you are here today, and once again, ringing the bell, sounding the alarm on what's taking place. I want to say the American Rescue Plan Act. This is something that President Joe Biden put in. I want you to begin to share with our listeners, and this is a very different platform, but this is something that is happening all across the country. There are millions of dollars, in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars coming into communities. Tell us where this money is coming from. Tell us how it can impact our community. And your thought was, if we don't talk about it, then many communities of color, many underserved communities will go and not be able to receive the benefit of these dollars. Go ahead, Carly. Why don't you share your story?
Exactly. So with American Rescue Plan Act, it was a package that was passed on March 11th of this year. So if you got your stimulus payment of $1,400, that was in the American Rescue Plan Act. There's also several other buckets, massive buckets of funding. There's over $1 trillion in this bill. And it's also part of what's called the Build Back Better plan. If you remember when Joe Biden was running,
Build Back Better.
Build Back Better. Build it back better. Okay. Right. It's a tongue twister, but that's what they want with. But it's part of his plan. Obviously, it's meant to address underlying critical infrastructure problems. And I will say I'm very happy with how the Biden administration has been handling these relief packages. And I say that as somebody who's very critical of people who are on my side of the aisle. I am not a nice person to politicians. I am very critical, but I'm happy with how these bills are being carried out, because ARPA had a specific bucket of funding that is going directly to state, local, and tribal governments. So what that means is usually when the federal government allocates funds, they give it to states, and then states decide how to spend it and how to distribute it among their state. That's the state legislature. Who's running the state legislature right now? It's Republicans. So oftentimes they benefit their constituents more. That's just how politics works. So what the Biden administration
I think that works with Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, that's just how
you're there to represent your constituents. So whether you're Democrat or Republican, and to your point, Carly, both of these political parties, when they get in office, often find certain groups and blocks of people who go overlooked in terms of their services and their needs being met. But go ahead, continue.
Absolutely. And I would even add on to that the metrics that we use often to measure need require a certain amount of resources in that community to say that they need. It's very backwards, but basically, if you've got competitive grants, you have to have somebody who's paid to fill out those competitive grants. So if you're a community where you're really strapped for resources, you don't have the resources to say and ask that you need more resources. So that's how you get communities that are actually much financially better off getting more aid than other communities that really need it. It's a backward system, but it is how we do things right now. Most things are competitive grants for funding for roads and infrastructure and things like that, which brings me to ARPA, because the Biden administration did something pretty historic, which is that if you are what's called an entitlement city, you actually get funds directly from the federal government. It doesn't go through the state government. And if you are a non-entitlement city, you still get that money from the federal government. You do have to go through a longer process through the state as to when you're going to get it. But pretty much you're going to get that money. It's coming from the federal government. If you're an entitlement city, it happens quicker. Saginaw is an entitlement city. That is based off of like the community development block grant model. So it's based off of population and based off of need. And we had this Treasury guidance that came out for ARPA. You'll hear that cited a lot. So basically, when ARPA was passed, it was passed through a really complex reconciliation progress in Congress. If you've heard of that before, the whole Senate rules thing to avoid the filibuster, all that stuff. So ARPA is a little bit unique in that the Senate parliamentarian ruled that they couldn't, edit certain things in ARPA. So it was kind of like a lot of gray area on that bill that there usually isn't. And when the Treasury guidance came out, it's 151 pages just for this portion on state, local, and tribal governments. And a lot of people were waiting for that and looking for that to see, okay, well, how can we actually spend this money? Because there were only a few stipulations that existed before that. And the Treasury guidance changed a lot of things. It recognizes, and this Treasury guidance from the Federal Department of the Treasury, from the Biden administration, recognized that COVID had a disproportionate impact on certain communities that had less in services, less economic, opportunities. And it basically,
No, I mean, what you're saying in essence is that the disparities that we all saw when COVID hit, we saw blaringly the public health situation. There were so many great disparities there. Disparities in housing, because people that were living in public housing tended to get COVID more than other places.
Absolutely.
So all of these disparities were now being published and seen firsthand, and while America's sitting and stopping. So the government recognized that, and so they made some moves.
Yeah, the administration wrote down in that guidance, we know this is happening, and this is what this money is going for to fix. Which doesn't happen. Usually, if you are a city and you get a grant or you get money, it's for a very specific thing. It's a Band-Aid to fix a very specific issue. That's not what's the case here. Saginaw has $52 million, and what the Treasury guidance says is...
Wait a minute, you said that really quick. Like, we talk about these monies all of the time. So Saginaw, the city of Saginaw, is going to receive, or they've already begun, $52 million. I need to make sure that people are hearing that.
$52 million.
$52
million. It is a lot. It's not 5, not 10, not 20, $52 million. County of Saginaw is getting about $36 million and each municipality is getting its own. Each city and each township is getting money. I believe Saginaw Township is receiving about $4 million. So it's and I think Buena Vista is getting 800,000. Bridgeport's getting 900,000 for their respective townships. So around that money. So for certain communities, it's more transformative than others, but it's still a good bucket of money for each of these communities. So really everybody, every community in the country should be looking at ARPA and saying, what can we do with these funds?
Okay, so now ARPA is providing these funds to these communities. Let's talk about how these funds are different than any other funds that we've ever received before. We understood the dynamic of being filtered down through the state government. These are funds that are coming directly from federal to these local help me.
Municipalities.
Thank you. I'm struggling here. All the words I use, I kept wanting to say principalities, but municipalities. So these municipalities get this money. And so when these municipalities get this money, they are to do what? I would say dream a big dream, but you explained it to me the way that you think is best.
So there are a few things in the bill that says that you specifically can spend it on. But when the Treasury guidance came out, again, they recognized that, yes, this is a COVID relief bill. This is for recovery. But beyond just the recovery of COVID, because they recognized that COVID was harder because of long-standing systemic problems. So in response, ARPA dollars are for addressing those long-standing systemic problems, things that create economic, health, wellness disparities, things that communities are asking for. So if you're in Saginaw and you're looking around and saying, where did all our youth programs go? Because that's really hurting our community that we're not having it. Some people would argue, and I would also argue that it's also a public safety issue, definitely a public health issue. Then yeah, you can spend ARPA dollars on that. You can spend ARPA dollars with community gardens because that's something that brings a community together, and it's wellness for the community. Revitalizing neighborhoods. If you believed that having a light rail or a monorail through the city of Saginaw improved like health and wellness because we need that transportation infrastructure to improve our economic independence or something, you can spend money on that, and you'd probably have still, $45 million left over after you spent money on that. Okay. So for Saginaw, the city of Saginaw specifically, it's transformative, the amount of money that there is, and the intent is to be transformative. Okay. The intent for spending these dollars is to be transformative.
So if I could jump in here really quick, I just want to make sure that our listeners are understanding. So these are monies not for the city manager or the city council to say, this is what we're going to do with this money. But these are monies that are coming to a community for the community to say to its leaders, this is how we want these monies to be spent. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. They are, and it's so much funding, and there are, I'll tell you the tiers of what we're thinking is important, because for COVID recovery, obviously for governments, a lot of them are going to want to plug their holes in their budget, which these funds allow for. But Saginaw does not have a $52 million hole in its budget. It's actually quite small. They can't spend it on utility holes. So if there's like the water bills, they can't use it to fill the government hole, but there are other funds coming down the line specifically for that. Biden just announced 2 days ago, $1.1 billion specifically for remediating water bills. So that's coming down the pipeline. And of course, ARPA is the Build Back Better plan, which means more infrastructure dollars coming down the line, more dollars for roads, more dollars for pipes. So right now, a lot of organizations are taking a look at this and saying, we want community-based solutions right now. That's what ARPA dollars are for. We're getting more infrastructure money down the line. So one, how can we maximize those funds? How can we prime our communities for those funds? But also, what do our communities want? What are they saying that they need? What are they saying are things that would help them not just recover from COVID, but get back stronger than ever before on their feet to prosperity, to quality of life? And my mission here is to spread this information to allow Saginaw residents to dream, to allow them to dream with this. So Carla,
when you look at this, so there is not a need with this, because based on what you're saying, there are other tiers of monies that will be coming to communities. So there's not a need for us to say, hey, $52 million, we just passed a budget for our schools. We just did, a millage for the school. So why don't we use this money instead? The schools are actually going to get additional funding through another portion of this act. Am I correct?
Yes, they actually, well, even more than that, because yes, ARPA had another $200 billion for schools. We have over $1 billion hanging out in the state legislature right now for schools that a lot of, I will say, Republican committees are hanging on to.
When you say hanging out, okay, because we've got to define
hanging
this.
out. They're hanging out.
Hanging out. What are we talking about?
So basically, the money is allocated from the federal government to go to Michigan schools. However, the state legislature needs to accept the funds. They need to essentially sign the paper and say, yeah, we would like $1 billion for our schools, and they won't do it. They're really delaying, and it's causing a lot of problems. It's called the ESSER funding, ESSER. You can look it up, ESSER. I think it's ESSER 2, because there's a 1 and then there's 2 funds. But basically, there's over $1 billion hanging out in the state legislature that it literally has our name on it. That is there. That is already allocated with very few strings attached, and because of politics, we don't have it in our schools' pockets, and it's really unfortunate. And on top of those funds, on top of what was allocated for ARPA, we have the American Families Plan coming, which we're getting more details about. But what is in that plan is universal pre-K, which is just mind-blowing, and also first 2 years of community college paid for across the nation. And all of these things, it's a plan, so it's still being worked out. None of these things are finalized, but we can look and see, okay, we know it's this much money, and we know these are the general things that it's going to be used for. Education is going to get a big boost in the next few years. And my impetus is to tell people to dream and really think about ways to transform our communities, and also help us set ourselves up for long-term success in terms of how can we look at and reimagine our state to be more equitable? How can we reimagine progressive tax rates to be more equitable in the future, so that these things aren't just a one and done and then it gets taken away eventually because of just one-time funding? But how do we set ourselves up to bring back our communities, to bring back the success and the feeling in people's hearts when they talk about how Saginaw was 50 years ago? How do we set ourselves up to create that again and to sustain it?
And something I think is important, and I see the comments in the streamline, the yard. One of the things that's important is that this is no longer political. And what I mean by that is this: once things have been passed and monies have been disseminated, it's no longer political. It now becomes, the monies have to be spent, and the money is coming. So this is a time for us to put aside our political hat. This is a time for us to look at, what does our community really look like? How can we become the best that Saginaw can be? And how do we go about doing that? So I see that comment, where the money's coming from, where it's allocated from. Those are all political issues. Those are budgetary issues. Those are things that we as a county don't have to worry about, because these monies have already been released and assigned to us in this community. So, Carly, how have you been getting the word out in terms of what's taking place? I happened to be a part of one of the conversations that was absolutely amazing that took place at First Ward. What are you guys doing, and how can people plug in and get involved?
So at First Ward, that was our first community meeting. We're going to be having more coming up. So if you don't like First Ward Community Center's Facebook page, make sure you like that, because they're going to be putting out a lot of the information on this. And we are having one the next week here. We don't know exactly what the day and time is yet. We're going to be working that out probably today or tomorrow. So we'll have an announcement on First Ward's page, and I can share that information with you, Kareem, to make sure it goes out on your page as well. And we'd like that one to be a little bit more advertised than the last one we had, because the last one we had about 45 people there, which was amazing for not really announcing it anywhere beforehand. Right. It just sort of got around last minute, but it was it was exactly what we wanted to do, which was allow people to dream and have like a social mixer and have people write their ideas and not really be constrained by us saying, oh, you can do this and you can't do this, you can do that and you can't do that. That's not what this is about. So we are starting these community meetings. We're also have a survey available online, and that's also going to be posted on First Ward. They're just working on the back end to make sure there's no slip through so people don't fall through the data. But that's going to be posted soon on First Ward. And there's a box, this is what you'd like to spend this money on, but there's also a big open box where people can type whatever they want. And we're really encouraging people to share their story and to go, my neighbor has this problem. I need to see this. I remember when we had this growing up, and this is why it was good. Those sorts of things we're looking for as well. We're not throwing away any piece of data. And in fact, when we were at First Ward at that first meeting and people were writing everything down on the paper, we had someone scribe all of those notes into an Excel sheet. So we have all of the original words of what people said and all the original ideas. And on that survey, you can also check a box and say that you would like to host an event, because we really want this to grow organically. And if you're a community leader, or even if you just have a few friends to come and get together and talk about this, basically all we need is the data, is, how many people were there? When did this happen? What were their ideas?
And that's all it takes. And now those of you who are listening, and Carly, thank you for being here on today. But those of you who are listening, if you want to get more information, we're going to do a 2-hour session talking about how these ARPA funds can be used, where they're coming from, what is the timeline, and how we can begin to mobilize to bring change into our community on KISS 107. This will begin at 6 p.m. with Community Connections. That's Joyce Harvin. Then following into Straight Talk with Kareem Bowen, which is my show on KISS WTLZ from 6 to 7, or from 5 to 7 p.m. So tune into that conversation. Carly will be there. I want to thank you guys for tuning in today. We are going to continue these conversations. We're going to redirect our resources and our attention to bringing change as we have conversations on race in America. As always, I always dream for the day where there's no longer black or white, but united shades of gray. You guys have an amazing time. Thank you for tuning in. Grace and peace. Gotcha. All right. So thank you guys for tuning in out there. Carly, thank you for tuning in once again. For those watching this via social media, we had to do some things in terms of production a little different because this will be used for the radio. So I apologize, but I want to give a shout out to the creator of that great music, James Owen, number 2. James Owen is the individual. He's done this music. He's so great. He's doing great things. And so shout out to him for that great music. Carly, once again, for those of us, if they have any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, ideas, where should they address those questions, or where should they forward those concerns?
So we have, there's First Ward Community Service is holding a lot of this information and a lot of the in and out. So if you're on their Facebook page, that's a really great way to get in touch. Also, if you complete the survey, you'll get into the system. So that's a way to like have your voice heard. If you have specific questions about things that they're doing, if you message First Ward Community Center Facebook page, that's a great way. There is an email. I don't have it on hand, and I think they just created it, so it's not set up yet. But I'm going to make sure that all of that information for everything that we're doing gets posted. We're still working on some of the fine details because, to be very frank, Michelle McGregor who is executive director at First Ward, is taking on a lot of this internal work right now, and she does not have a lot of capacity at First Ward. They're a service, I will say this with utmost confidence, that deserves more funding and that because they're doing so much work on the ground.
They're the oldest
partnership with CAC as well.
Yeah, they're the oldest community organization in Saginaw.
Yes.
So, yeah, the way that they're operating. And so they work on a shoestring budget. But as a kid growing up, I remember being a part of the programming, going to the Christmas programs, singing on the stage, the summer programs. And so you're absolutely right, Carly. I'm glad that they're very involved because they deserve some of what's going on, because they target populations of youth. And we're having such a strong issue with youth in our community, especially with the gun violence that's going on. So addressing some of those concerns and issues means working with those community leaders and organizations that are staples in the community. So we want to thank you guys for tuning in. Those of you out there on social media, we're closing out here on today. Check us out once again this coming Sunday when this airs. If you're watching this on the radio or you're listening to this on the radio, you're going to have missed it. But those of you who are watching this via social media or that will see this in its replay, Sunday at 6 p.m. on KISS WTLZ, that's 107.1 FM on your radio dial. We're going to be on there from 5 to 7 p.m. Miss Carly will be on there, and we're going to talk about everything as it relates to these ARPA funds. There's a lot of money coming to Saginaw County, as well as, $52 million coming to the city. We've got to make sure that our voices are being heard, that we are showing that we have a desire to see something great happens. And these funds are something that the community can actually come together around. We can begin to unite around these funds, come up with a unified vision on how to bring change and make great things happen in the Saginaw community. Carly, thank you so much once again. Thank you. You're such an amazing person. I'm so glad we've come together. It took a whole world protesting to bring us together, but I think that we're going to make some great things happen as we move forward. Thank you so very much.
I agree, and thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure.
All right, take care. God bless.